So now that you had an overview of the Agile Manifesto and the Agile mindset, now we're going to get into a specific Agile framework, and that's Scrum. So what is Scrum? Scrum it comes from this rugby term, and sometimes it's described as an Agile project management framework, but it's not. It's really much more about product delivery. And Scrum is a way of having your team embrace a more agile mindset while at the same time giving the team a framework to sort of understand how to improve. Remember, one of the agile principles in continuous improvement. And so Scrum is a way to improve your process, and it's a way for your teams to embrace an agile mindset and deliver predictably in what they call sprints. So Scrum is basically built on what they call the 3 pillars. There's transparency, inspection, and adaptation. And so these 3 pillars help your team kind of embrace a more agile mindset. A good way to think about Scrum is imagine Agile almost as kind of fitness, like if you were going to figure out a way to become more physically fit. And that there's very different ways to become more physically fit, and this is the Agile mindset. So you're trying to become more physically fit. You could take up swimming, you could take up golfing, you could take up tennis, you could take up weightlifting. Well, Scrum is a framework for helping your team become more agile. In a sense, it's like yoga, or it's like Pilates, or it's like CrossFit, or something like that. It's a program to help you achieve greater fitness. And so Scrum in itself is a framework to sort of help improve your teams to embrace a more agile mindset. But you shouldn't think of Scrum as agile. You should think of it as a framework to help your team become more agile. But it's not the same as agile. And so think of Agile as fitness and Scrum as kind of like a way to become fit. Almost like I said, like CrossFit or something like that. And so these ideas in Scrum will help you become more agile, but they're not the same as the Agile mindset. So you can think about these 3 pillars as the way that Scrum helps you embrace a more agile mindset. There's transparency, inspection, and adaptation. And you'll see these 3 pillars throughout the Scrum practices. There's transparency. You'll see this with Scrum putting up a board so that you can see what the team is working on. There's daily scrums or daily stand-ups where the team talks to each other about what they're doing. You get transparency into the process. The product owner and the development team work closely together, and so there's transparency about what's being done. There's sprint reviews so that the customer can see what's being done every sprint. And so there's a lot of transparency in Scrum. There's inspection as well. And inspection is a key part to sort of getting better. And inspection and adaptation are often seen sort of as a loop in Scrum. You're inspecting and adapting. Is you're looking at ways that you can improve, and then you're adapting as a way to improve it. And you see that all throughout Scrum practices, is that the team will get together for sprint reviews and look and sort of at ways to improve the product. And the team will get together for retrospectives, and they'll figure out ways to improve how the team works together. And so you should almost think of this as a loop between inspection and adaptation. You should be able to inspect the way things are going with the product or with the team and adapt to make improvements. And again, you can see how this ties into this agile mindset, is that you're continuously improving it's people over process, and you're working together to improve the product. So these are kind of the 3 pillars of Scrum, and you'll see this in almost all of their roles and practices. Now, Scrum itself is not huge. It's actually, you can download the Scrum guide for free. Its current version of it only has 19 pages, and it lays out the roles and what calls the Scrum events and the artifacts and the different rules. And so you could quickly read Scrum and get an idea of how the team can work together to use this framework to deliver with a more agile mindset. But the rules of the game are actually pretty straightforward. You can, like I said, you can read it pretty quickly, but it's how you apply these rules that makes Scrum more interesting. Now, Scrum, again, is pretty minimal, but you want to stick pretty closely to the Scrum guide. Everything in this course will be closely related to the Scrum guide. You don't want to sort of inspect and adapt away different roles. So the reason they keep Scrum minimal is so that you can sort of have a very loose framework, but it's also a very, it's a framework that you should follow closely. Like it's a lightweight framework, but it shouldn't be adapted to, whatever you think might work better in your organization. Like you wouldn't want to merge the Scrum Master and the product owner and say, hey, we're Agile, so we're just changing the rules of the game for Scrum. So the reason they keep it minimal is so that there's a few simple rules, but you should follow those rules because the rules work together with the events and the artifacts to sort of make it all kind of fit together. And if you start to change some of the events or if you start to get rid of some of the roles, then it won't take long for kind of the entire framework to start to break down. So I've certainly coached a lot of organizations that said, well, we only have the product owner for like a month because we're trying to be agile. We're changing the Scrum process. We're just looking at Scrum Guide as some good place to start, but we're just sort of tweaking it to fit our needs. And that can get you into a lot of trouble. So there's certainly other organizations that have taken Scrum and made changes to it. There's the Scaled Agile framework. There's large-scale Scrum. There are other organizations that have sort of taken this framework to make it try to work better for larger products. But again, those are frameworks that have spent years developing kind of like these changes. And it wasn't just kind of an inspect and adapt, hey, we decided to get rid of the Scrum Master. It was very thoughtful, and the way they go through it is to try and sort of still make sure that the framework works. So the Scrum Guide is minimal, but you should try to follow it as closely as possible. And this whole course tries to follow the roles as closely as possible. I would never recommend that you sort of have a part-time Scrum Master or a development team that's also the product owners, that this is the way that it should work together. Now Scrum, there are 4 Scrum events, and there's kind of like a Scrum sort of event. There's the daily stand-up, which is often called the daily Scrum. There's the sprint demo, which is often called the sprint review. There's a retrospective, and then there's the sprint planning meeting, which is split into 2 parts. And then there's also backlog refinement, which is kind of an activity in Scrum, but not necessarily a full meeting, where the developers will work closely with the product owner to refine the backlog. And this will take some overhead, takes 10% of each sprint. There's some overhead that you should have each sprint so that you can work with the product owner to refine the product backlog. But that in itself is not sort of an event that necessarily you should have like the other 4 in Scrum. So backlog refinement's kind of out there, and then there's the daily Scrum, the sprint review, retrospective, and sprint planning.